go, but it is about saying, can we put ourselves in the headspace of starting to think about what's become a really hot topic in our schools, and that is about whether we can or not teach empathy. For me, I believe that building empathy in young people is, as the title suggests, the key to improving student behaviour. I think that very clearly when much of our behaviour in schools, particularly most teachers are telling me that they're concerned about aggressive behaviours and about selfish behaviours and about behaviours that demonstrate a lack of resilience, that when we can actually say on the other side of dealing with the problem might be that we can create a fantastic protective factor, and that is a high level of empathy. Because when you are capable of empathy, and indeed when empathy becomes a part of you, you're certainly far less inclined to be out there doing things to other people that make them feel awful. And the main reason for that is because you feel awful when it happens. And as much as we don't want our students to feel awful at school, when you do feel bad about doing the wrong thing, what happens is that you've enacted your conscience. And we should feel really happy in our role when we enact the consciences of our young people, because I know that I haven't met a teacher yet who I asked the question, would you like your students to have a conscience? And very universally they're telling me, yes, of course we do. Well, the way to do it is to make sure that we do feel that pang of regret, that pang of embarrassment, even that tiny little bit of shame that comes along with knowing that we did the wrong thing. The conundrum, and I guess you'll hear me use that word a bit today when we're talking about empathy. The conundrum is the whole concept of whether we can do anything about empathy. Is building empathy something that perhaps our students just arrive with either a certain capacity for, or is there only so much we can do with the amount of empathy they come along with, or is it something that through their school experience we can improve and we can change? And I want to contend that the literature tells us that in terms of building the social and the moral growth of our young people through school, that our influence sits at around 30%. So that means that about 30%, and this is pretty consistent across from early childhood all the way through to senior secondary, that of the social and emotional growth that they're doing, the schools are responsible for about 30% of it. Now, I'm going to take that, and I'm going to take it and run, because I actually think that 30% isn't bad. When you consider the competition that we have for that influence over their growth, from media, from community, from home, from social media in particular is obviously a new one that many people are concerned about, then I think that we need to work incredibly hard on that 30%, because sometimes if we can fill that 30% really high, if some of our students in particular are not getting it elsewhere, then it can take them across some pretty critical thresholds in their life. So for me, I prefer that when we're asking two key questions in getting going, and the first one being, can we actually teach empathy? I believe that yes, we can. I'm going to take the optimistic route there, but it is really important here that, like the picture that you can see on the screen, that you've got your opportunity to back out now. Because I certainly do hear a lot of teachers saying from time to time, some kids just aren't capable of empathy, or some kids just don't do empathy, or this kid, we can't use this strategy because he doesn't care at all about the way that his behaviour affects other people. And I'm going to ask us to stop and to check ourselves a little bit there. And if that is you, then sure, back out of this webinar now. If you think that that it's impossible to teach empathy and impossible to improve empathy beyond the empathy capacity that they come to school with, then sure, this webinar isn't for you. But for me today, there are two key components that need to be in play if we are going to teach empathy. Number one is the immersion of our students in a culture that is empathic, and I'll talk more to that a little bit later. And number two is how you do the explicit teaching of empathy, how we bring that to their attention, and how we establish language that allows them to practice it with some sort of repetition. Why we should bother is because I think that once we actually build an empathic community in our school, once we actually even get some traction with our students who have the least tendency to be empathic, I think that what happens is that we actually start to address some of the big issues in schools. I know that many of you will head out into your work in semester 2 this year, knowing that you are going to come up against conversations with staff, and in conversations with parents, and in conversations with students about bullying. And I want to contend really strongly to you that when it comes to bullying, that we've been playing the bullying game or the anti-bullying game the wrong way. Even the term anti-bullying for me is a contradiction, because it gives the idea that we're up against an enemy here, and I want to say that we're not. We're actually in the business of behaviour change. And in order to change behaviour, what we need to do is to build thought, and thoughtful we can make our young people, then the less likely they are to bully, the less likely they are to do things that would reflect a negative or power influenced interaction with another person. So the truth is that the only antidote, if there is one to bullying, is empathy. It certainly isn't one of the 9,000 programs that have been developed all around the world globally in an attempt to programmatise bullying behaviour out of students. Simply running a program on a Wednesday afternoon that says "say no to bullying," or that in which we make a poster about not being a bystander, unfortunately doesn't do the job. So we need to get clear about what's the explicit teaching that works, and then clear also about the culture that we're building around our schools so that we can do something around that. So first of all, I want to take the optimistic route here, that in answering this question, can we teach empathy? My answer is an undoubted yes, we can. The next thing that we need to have a discussion about before we get moving with the actual running of our empathy today is the concept of capacity. And that great conundrum we have, we often have it particularly around our autistic or Asperger's or ADHD kids, about where we say that sometimes we can't do empathy, or we can't encourage empathy in these students because they don't have the capacity, they don't have the ability to do it. I again, I'm going to take the optimistic route here and say, sure, we have varying levels of ability in our young people to be empathic. So the hole in my bucket may be higher than the hole in your bucket. But what I do believe is that there's always room for a little bit of water. There's always the chance to fill up to the best level that we possibly can, and even along the way sometimes we might even be able to get so much in there that we can patch a hole or two and go beyond the capacity that we thought they had. Because what happens if we believe that our young people are incapable of empathy is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We access them to less learning and less opportunity to behave empathically, and as a result they don't grow any empathy. And I think that that's selling our students short, and I think that it's denying them a work skill. If you go and have a look at the way that we're often very much admiring Scandinavian schools and the way they're going about their work. Well, if you have a look at the Ashoka program and how they use that program to try and be the focus or the centre of what's the purpose of their schools, one of the key things they're looking to develop is empathy. And what they understand is that if we have some students who are getting a high level of empathy and becoming fantastic global employees, and there are some students who are not, then we are growing a gap in between the haves and the have-nots in that regard. So not only do I think the assumption that some kids can't do empathy at all is wrong, I think that it's self-fulfilling, and we should be very careful about saying that. So again, I know that I'm getting off on the front foot today when it comes to empathy, but I do think that it's really important that I pay you the respect of letting you know that this is where I come from around working empathically with our young people, and if that collides at all with your worldview, then I want to give you the opportunity to step away from some strategies that won't actually align with your worldview. Okay, so there's the introduction to what we're talking about today, but what I really want to do also is make sure that you understand what the webinar is all about today, and understand that you're at the wheel. You're the person who controls the webinar today. I've made a very explicit attempt today to make sure that this webinar isn't over-planned, which means that what I don't want the webinar to do today is to go right up to time and to give you no opportunity to ask a question or to be involved. So I want you to be very aware of those two key mechanisms. There's a couple of names that I see on our attendee sheet today who that I haven't seen in the webinar in our webinars previously. So if you are a newbie, then welcome aboard. If you are a frequent flyer, then welcome back. But we really want you to be able to drive this today, and I want to stop and have conversations with you about the key points that are raised, because to me understanding the teaching of empathy often does take a conversation. It's a pretty, it's a pretty ethereal and difficult concept to get your head around sometimes, and I want you to have the opportunity to interact today. So please remember that there is a question box. Okay, so if you head into the question box, you can let us know anything that's on your mind, anything that you would like us to answer as we move forward. You can also let us know in the question box, for instance, if you've got that terrible connection, or if you're not hearing us properly, if you've got some sort of technological issue with your participation in the webinar today, because our awesome business manager, Chris Annabrad, is online as well, and she's going to take care of any of the technological issues that you might be having along the trip as well. So you've got that question box available to you, and if you look hard at your control panel, you'll also see that there's a hand up option. There's one that looks like a little palm of a hand there, and you can put your hand, just like you're in a classroom, you can put your hand up or you can put it down. Now, the great news is when you put your hand up is that I can actually unmute you from here on the control panel, and instead of asking a question in the question box, we can actually verbally hear that question. So Geraldine, I can see that you've got your hand up at the moment, so I'm going to give you an opportunity just that you might be testing at the moment, but know that it's there. If you want to put your hand down, you can, and I'll go to those people who do put their hand up who want to ask a question as we go. Sometimes it makes the webinar a little bit jumpy because people put their hand up by accident, but we can certainly live with that. All right, so I'm just going to check. We've got 3 people with their hand up at the moment. So Geraldine, Helen and Wei, I want you to just have the opportunity to put your hand down if that was you. Geraldine was just testing. Thank you very much for letting us know. And anybody else, Wei, I'm going to give you just a moment in case you put your hand back down before I unmute you and embarrass you highly in front of everybody who's here on the webinar today. All right, I know there's people who are just having a bit of a test with that as well, and that's fine. So remember, you've got those 2 mechanisms available to you. Now, we can't say get involved with the webinar and then give you no opportunity to get involved with the webinar. So what I want to do today is I want to find out the lay of the land. So we're going to run a couple of polls here. First one is I want to know from where are you viewing this today? Today's one of our webinars that we put together for our teachers, but it doesn't mean that everybody here is a teacher or that you're all teaching the same sort of phase of learning. So I'm going to launch a poll here. I'm going to ask you to jump in for me, and I want you to just let me know what's your view of the situation here. You come today as a primary teacher, a middle years or a secondary teacher. You might be an ed support or even admin in a school, okay, if you're a tutor. You might be a school leader. If that's you, please let me know there. And you might also be a system leader as well. So if you're looking to work out how you can support groups of schools, then please let us know who you are and where you come from. So I really appreciate this, guys. Sometimes I need to pad for a bit of time here to get the vote out to at least 80%, but you've rocketed me all the way to 94% already. So that gives me the chance to close the poll. And I'm just going to share these results with you so you can see who you're sharing the room with today. So we've got half of the people here are primary teachers. Welcome aboard, all of our primary teachers. We've also got middle and secondary teachers, and we've got a fair cohort of school leaders in the room as well. So welcome aboard. I'm going to try and keep that in mind as we move forward and just tailor my advice accordingly, even though we do have quite a spread of people in the room here. So I'm just going to hide those results. Then if I head back here, this will all work seamlessly, of course, because I'm so technologically advanced. And if I go to the next screen, what I also want to do is to find out what it is for you around working empathically that is a struggle for you. How would you describe the issues that you're seeing in your school? So have a little think about this one. This one might take you just a little longer to be able to tell us what's the reason that you're here today. So first of all, is it a collective will to teach empathy or to teach empathically? Is it getting your teachers on side that's an issue here, getting your colleagues on side? Is it about the influences on students from home? Is it this feeling that it's very hard to encourage the students to be empathic when somebody at home is telling them, well, if anybody does this to you, you just break their jaw and I've given you permission to do that? Is it about strategy selection? So is it like I want to tell our people how to work empathically, I want to share that with people in my PLT, for instance, but I don't know what strategies to use. I want to make sure we hit today a handful of strategies that you can start immediately with. It's no point talking about this in there to just do something with that. It's really important that you get a couple of very simple strategies that you can use immediately. Is it embedding empathic work in a busy program so that we don't just go, let's do empathy for half an hour on Thursday afternoon and then believe that we have sheep-dipped everybody in our environment into doing it? Or is it that, you know what, people, when you talk to people about teaching empathy, they kind of go, oh, really? Do we have to do that? Is it really important? No, really? And there's not the enthusiasm or the motivation to do it, because empathy has a bit of an image problem in that people think that there's a lot of soft, warm and fuzziness around empathy, but it's perhaps not giving them what they really want. So selecting one is difficult, Geraldine, but I want you to actually give yourself the test today of picking the one that resonates most loudly for you. Okay, so I'm going to close that poll there. We've taken me above 80%, which is fantastic, and in sharing the results we can see that this is about where to start. So I actually anticipated that that one would be the highest one today in building the webinar. And the reason for that is that I think that there's a collective understanding across schools now that we are starting to get into, hey, this matters, this is important, but what do we do? How do we actually make ground, and how do we start to get some traction in this space so that we can get somewhere? We've also got a fair bit of how do we get the influences from home in place? How can we build upon that 30% when there's so much that they come with that's a challenge as well? So that's good for me to know. I need to spend a little bit of time. If I'm going to dwell anywhere today, it certainly needs to be on strategy. So I'm going to close there and then go back to our slide. I love that picture too. I think that's a great picture for the word struggle. Reminds me of the things that I need to talk about. Okay, let's start our journey with empathy. We talked about the why of it before, but what I actually want to do here is also to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing, that we're on the same page here when it comes to empathy. So what we need to do is to spend just a little bit of time defining what empathy really is. Because a lot of people get confused. A lot of people think that there's a direct correlation or a similarity between sympathy, apathy, and empathy. And so let's unpack those for just a moment. Apathy is really easy because it's really just about these young people who say, who cares? I don't care. And unfortunately, a lot of people are telling me that they're concerned about higher levels of apathy in our schools, and mainly it comes through language, that our young people are telling us repeatedly that they don't care. Or they give us the reply, who cares? So you ask a young person, hey, how do you think you made that person feel when you threw a ball at them across the yard and it hit them in the head? And the answer is not even inaccurate. They just go, no, who cares? So that's apathy when we get that. We're concerned about that. And again, the replacement to apathy is empathy. But in the middle, there's this middling ground where we're often confused about apathy because we think that it's the same as sympathy, and it's not. I think the best way to view sympathy is to think about it in terms of flowers. And that's what sympathy is all about. And the thing that's really interesting about sympathy is that sympathy actually isn't about the other person. Sympathy is about us. So, and what I mean by that is if you even think about when flowers are sent in sympathy, it's usually with a little tag that says sincere condolences on it, and we send flowers to somebody if there's been a death in their family. Yet, if we actually take ourselves out of that situation and think of ourselves as the person who has lost a dear family member, we might gather together in the family home with others who can console us, and we console each other in that way, which is a really great thing for a family to do. But I bet that none of us are actually sitting together in the lounge room going, this is really awful that Uncle Frank has passed away. I really wish we had more flowers. That'd make this so much easier. And we're not sitting there thinking that. The presence of flowers, when people send flowers, it's because, you know, it's Max and Beryl who sent us a bunch of flowers and it arrives at the door and we're very impressed and we go, that's terrific, somebody get a vase, fill the vase up and put them on the table, that's great. But because the flowers keep coming, by about the 8th or 9th bunch of flowers that arrive at the front door, we're sort of going, yeah, no worries, thanks for that, whack them on the table with the other ones. Because it's not actually doing us any good. The act of sending the flowers was because Max and Beryl, as much as it's a nice thing to do, Max and Beryl wanted to feel that they were contributing in some way, that they wanted to let you know that their thoughts are with them. And that's about Max and Beryl. So the flowers aren't going to bring back Uncle Frank, and they're not really going to make us feel a lot better. But Max and Beryl felt that they wanted to let us know they were thinking about us. So that's what sympathy is. Sympathy is about me. So if a young person, for instance, comes to you and tells you that they are being bullied, and we go, oh, I know exactly what you're going through. This happened to me when I was in year 9, and all that. There was this group of girls who did this, and they kept saying mean things to me, and it's just exactly the same thing. It's just that now you've got Facebook, and it's completely the same thing. This is how I handle it. At this point, we're expressing sympathy. This isn't empathy at all, because this has all become all about us. We're not thinking about what it's like for the other person and what it's like for them to actually, that old expression, what it's like to walk a mile in their shoes. When we are making it about them, that's when we're demonstrating empathy. So an empathic response to a young person who is telling us that they are being bullied by somebody or by a group of people is to be able to express that we can see the impact on them. So when we can say things like, this seems to really be getting you down, or it seems to me you're just looking for some strategy here, or it seems to me that this is having a really strong impact on you and you don't know what to do next, is us demonstrating to another person that we're trying to actually put ourselves in their shoes. And that's okay to get that wrong. We can say, I can see that this is making you, feel really sad. And they'll go, hang on, I'm not sad, I'm angry. That's okay. Because what we've done is try to actually put ourselves in their shoes, and now we do understand what the impact is for them, and we can strategize with them from there. So critically important that, in particular, apathy stands alone. It's pretty easy to tell when someone's being apathetic, but we often get that confusion between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is about me. Empathy is about the other, and so we want to keep that in mind while we're moving forward. Why is it important then that we do build empathy, and how do we go about starting? So, like I mentioned earlier in the webinar, there are two key areas that we need to pay attention to. Number one is the culture that we are placing our young people in. Now, culture, as many people know who work with me, my working definition of culture is that it's just a set of behaviours. It's a set of behaviours that we both encourage. We say, yes, that's great, well done. And it's the behaviours that we tolerate. They're the behaviours that exist in our culture, but we're not quite sure how to challenge or change them. So getting clear about what the behaviours are that are in our environment that are empathic, and then encouraging and rewarding those and going out of our way to do so is a really important thing to do. I've been delighted lately to find a couple of schools that I work with who are actually labelling empathy as a value in the school, which I think is a terrific thing to do. I think that far too many of our values out there have started to become very generic, and I will offend a certain percentage of you when I say this, but I think that if we only start with respect, responsibility and excellence when we start to label our values, then they just blend in with every other school. But I've been delighted to find schools lately that are starting to talk about empathy as being a value, because once we actually define it as a value, what we can do is say, and these are the behaviours that sit under it that are empathic, and we can reward those and make sure that there's an ongoing encouragement to demonstrate those clearly defined behaviours in a really consistent way. The next thing we need to do is to make sure that we have explicit teaching in place. Now, to give you my absolute really quick nutshell of how you teach empathy, how you teach any social skill, is a quick three-stepper. Number one is to make sure that we teach explicitly by defining it. So we tell people what empathy is, and with young students you might say empathy is when we can tell how someone else feels, and we sing it and we say it in silly voices and we repeat it over and over and over again, because that's how you teach early childhood students. And in our secondary students, be just that we have a simple statement that says that this is how we behave empathically, is that we always use an apology of action, and I'll talk about a little later about that. So we teach it explicitly and we make it clear that there's language that works with that. The next thing we do is we give them the opportunity to apply it using something fun. So we want to find a non-threatening way to use that situation, and role plays are awesome for that. So a great way to do it is to, in the classroom, to set up, to give people roles, to allow them to act out a play, and to demonstrate the difference. So the first one we want to do it when there's no empathy, when we show that we don't care at all about the way other people feel. And then the second time we're going to role play this, we're going to do it where there's a high level of empathy for people, and then they can have a little bit of fun with it as well. You can even ask them, certain characters to be empathic and certain characters not to be empathic, and you get some really interesting stuff start to play out. And the kids and role plays are terrific for all ages, but the kids then get to practice, and they get to differentiate the difference between people behaving empathically and when they're not. And the third one is that we need to apply it then to the real world. So we ask them to problem solve. We teach it explicitly, we apply it to something enjoyable, and then we apply it to the real world. So when those social problems do come along, we have to make sure that we do ask questions about how empathic were you? How empathic do you think the other people were? We want to give them the opportunity. What would be the next step to do if you were going to be empathic in this situation? And if we have those conversations, if you were to show empathy, and if we have those conversations with them, then what happens is they refer in their neocortex section of their brain to the information that we've already established there. We put some language there, we put some definition. They had a practice with it in a really non-threatening environment with role play, and then the real world came along, and we were able to, instead of try to teach them in that moment what empathy is all about, because trying to teach an angry student about empathy is, the definition of insanity, I think. What we're actually trying to do is to make sure that they get the chance to reuse some information that we previously taught them. Now, what do we get when we start to get a good combination of school culture and explicit teaching and asking the right questions around being empathic? The first stage that we get is we get this level of what we would refer to as, what we would refer to as being empathy. Now that means that they're accessing the language. From a cognitive point of view, they're actually able to find the piece of information in my brain that tells me that when I physically hurt another person, they are likely to feel either upset, sad, or angry. And I can know it. I can know it for a fact. And the issue here is this is where there's a great capacity, because often our students who even have ASD have terrific cognitive ability. There's often not a great cognitive impairment at play there. There often is sometimes some dual disability stuff happening. But what we know is that some of them have even a giftedness for being able to remember facts. So if we can teach them explicitly and provide them that language, they do at least build this cognitive empathy. Above that cognitive empathy, we start to get what we would call intuitive empathy, which means that, you know what, I don't need to refer to a piece of information here. I may say something in a conversation, I look across the table at somebody else and I can see the awkwardness in their face, and I can tell that something I said went down the wrong way. And this is where we often refer to students as being, having a really strong level of empathy, is they have this intuition. They can actually tell by looking at people's facial expressions or the way that they've spoken back to people. They've got an intuition about, actually, I think I've said something here and I may need to backtrack a bit, I may need to fix that up, I may need to do something that will allow me to make sure that I'm not damaging relationships on the run. Now, why do we care about students at least getting strong cognitive empathy, and then if we can step them over into intuitive empathy? It's because I think there's a third line on this graph, and that green line will appear at different places for different people, but I call that my employability line. I think that what we need to do is at some stage, even with our ASD kids, if they don't learn that if I were to tell my boss to F off, that he's likely to sack me, if they don't learn that from a cognitive perspective, then it doesn't make them employable. But if they do, and they can start to inch towards that intuitive empathy, then they do cross that threshold. They do cross that green line, and they do become employable. And they can go out and lead really fantastic and productive lives as a result of us exposing them to at least the explicit teaching and the language. Even better if we can have that happen in an environment where in an environment or a culture where empathy is recognised and rewarded. Of course, for some students, the threshold here, the capacity here to be able to get really high up in that graph isn't always wonderful. But sometimes if we can do just enough to get them past that employability line, you're making a significant difference in their lives that can't be underestimated in terms of even comparison to some of the academic learning that we want them to be able to do as we move along. All right, I promised I was going to get ridiculously practical today. So strategy one, and you might have noticed this bob up, and I'm wondering even if a couple of people may have even wondered whether this would be a good activity as a beginning point. Strategy one, when we're looking to build high levels of empathy, is to bolster emotional vocab. If I, honestly guys, if I find one more middle year student who thinks that, that I made someone happy, sad or angry and they're the only things that I can make people feel, then even when I hit someone over the head with a cricket bat, how did you make them feel? Sad. I don't think so. I don't think it's sad. And like that, So using an activity like this, I even like this picture here of asking our students that if they were to work in a group of 4 with 25 heads in front of them, could they come up with 25 different words to describe the way that that person in the picture is feeling? And what we're doing there is bolstering emotional vocabulary. It's a little bit of that work that has them going across into neocortex and providing a high level of information that they can access when the moment comes along. Okay, so I love providing pictures like that. Emojis and emoticons are really good for this. And what happens when you, in particular, like I said before, if you can put students in groups and get them to discuss this, what you find is one person who will say, oh, that's this. And then the 3 other people in the group will look at them and go, you got to be kidding me. And so they actually, oh, hang on a sec, and certain things get dispelled. Certain myths get dispelled. So we do have the situation sometimes where certain myths get perpetuated because it's never been challenged, it's never been talked about. So an example of that would be there's been some great myths that have evolved over body language, in particular the way that the body language is read by males and females, and in particular again by heterosexual males and females. In that a lot of, with females, often if a female were to poke her tongue out to the side of her mouth, for most females who do that, the emotion that sits behind that is curiosity. That they're sitting there thinking, oh, I wonder how this works, and they're trying to work it out in their head. Yet for a male, the myth that's perpetuated if I see a female with tongue out to the side of the mouth is that, oh, I think she's interested in me, and it's a complete mismatch with the actual truth. And this is obviously information that when I was 18 or 19 years of age I would have really appreciated. So it's good to be able to look at different facial expressions and to make sure that people have the opportunity to discuss what that facial expression means to them. I'm just going to take a little pause here because I'm mindful that I do sometimes have a bit of a rush, and Chris is making sure that I'm very aware that we have people with their hands up. So Tanya, I noticed that you've got your hand up. Keep that up if you want me to pause here and unmute you. And I'm noticing that Wei, you've got your hand up again as well. So I'm just going to give you the chance to put your hand down, because in a few seconds I'm going to unmute you. And I noticed very quickly, like shy children in the classroom, those hands have gone down. So thanks very much for that, guys. I appreciate it. All right. Again, very important, bolster emotional vocab so that when the crunch comes, they've got more words than happy, sad, or angry to go to. Facial expressions are a terrific way to be able to do that. The next strategy, I've got 4 key strategies that I want you to have access to moving on straight away. The second strategy, sorry, is to get Socratic, which means to as much as I don't really I think modern educational theory has a lot to offer us, and I don't think that looking way back into history to Socrates sometimes isn't always the best thing that we should do. I do love this quote that I cannot teach anybody anything, I can only make them think. And what that goes to is the concept that many of you who know me will have heard me say, is that no behaviour changes randomly. So no behaviour that anybody exhibits will exhibit that behaviour just for no reason. There's always an antecedent, there's always a trigger, there's always some thinking that happens behind it. My example for that is that none of us woke up this morning on a diet. We didn't accidentally eat half a grapefruit for breakfast and go, what on earth was that and where did that come from? What happens is that we look at the number on the scales, or we see an old photo of ourselves, or we see an ad for some new fad diet, and instead of being in the supermarket and choosing the Nutri-Grain, we choose half a grapefruit, and then over a period of many thoughts, eventually the behaviour changes. So in terms of getting Socratic, what we need to do is to make sure that we, Socrates' big thing about great learning was to ask questions. So what we need to do is, there's 2 parts to asking questions. Number 1 is to ask the right questions. I'll talk to that in strategy 3. The next one around asking those questions is when we do ask questions to young people about, what's going on, or how did you make people feel there, or what do you think you're going to do about that? The next one is to get comfortable with silence. I believe firmly that teachers are the very world's worst at being able to comfortably sit in silence. So often what we'll do is we'll ask a young person, so how did you think that behaviour has impacted other people? And then they won't answer the question. I don't know. We'll go, well, I'll tell you how that's affected other people. So we're not very good at being able to fill that gap, and I want us to get very comfortable. I want you to get very happy. I want you to enjoy and celebrate the silence when a young person battles to answer a question, because what happens in that silence is that they start to think. They start to act, oh boy, and even if the thinking starts with, how do I get this guy to go away? And I'm like, what did he ask me again? Oh, he said that, didn't he? And I'm like, I guess, what does he want me to hear? I guess I'm supposed to say this. What's that word about? He doesn't like it when I say that. Okay, I'll say this. But you can probably hear the thinking that at least has begun to happen there. Like I said, no behaviour will change without concentrating on prompting the thinking to happen first. So get Socratic, guys, ask lots of questions and make sure you get comfortable with the silence. And then you know what? If they give you, if I may speak so plainly, if they give you crappy answers, and all that, then probe and probe and probe again until they start to provide a level of maturity, honesty in their answers that you think is commensurate to the situation that you're in. And you know what? There is no perfect set of questions to ask, and that I certainly trust your professional ability to come up with good questions on the spot for all varieties of situation and all that. But in this situation, what happens when young people do the wrong thing, if we leap into lecture mode and tell them rather than ask, they endure our rant. And in the rant, we're not listening. We're not paying attention. And if we haven't got anywhere, we're sitting there in our heads going blah, 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 and that's not thinking that's going to lead to any sort of positive behaviour change. So critically important there. Make sure that you ask lots of questions, get comfortable with the silence, and then probe, probe, probe. Okay, strategy number 3 that I want you to focus on is to make sure that every situation goes from past to present to future. People who've experienced my work before around restorative practices will know that there's a set of restorative question cards that you can use. I'm happy to provide you with some of those. Just send us an email today and we'll pop a couple in the, if you send an email to info@realschools.com.au, we're happy to send you a couple of question cards that you can use on the run. And that's not a problem at all. But what people sometimes think is that restorative question cards are some script that you need to awkwardly get out of your lanyard whenever a student does the wrong thing, and that's not true. The questions have a function, and we need to be really aware of what that function is, and all the function is that they take the situation from past to present to future. So if you ask no restorative questions when you have a young person that you're working with, but none of the ones off the card, but at the end of it you put your hand on your heart and you say, you know what, I went past, present, future, then I say, well done. You've done a good job of not only being restorative, but you've done a really good job of promoting empathy. Why? As most of you probably will have recognised here, that that when we actually get stuck in if we get stuck in one of these past, present, future phases, it's usually the past. Where usually our students lapse into bush lawyer mode, and what they do is try to let us know that by building my case about he did what, this is how strongly he did it, this is how often he did it, this is how badly he did it. What we're trying to do is to let you know that I'm less at fault than the other people here. And in this case, if I can let you know that I'm the less at fault, then I think I can minimise the impact of the punishment on me. And this is a high level of self-interest when I'm doing this. So the more we lock a conversation into the past, the less empathic we are encouraging our young people to be. In fact, we are encouraging them by launching full forensic investigations into rather simple behaviour infractions. We are encouraging them to be more self-centred and as a result less empathic. So look to very quickly, and this isn't about saying that if you were going to spend 10 minutes investigating that you now need to do 10 on the past, 10 on the present, 10 on the future. I would suggest to you that your best strategy now is to go 2 or 3 minutes on the past. That'll do me. I have a very, very technical term for how much of the past we need to pay attention to. It's a gist. If you've got a gist of what's gone wrong, then it's time to get to the present, which is understanding the impact on other people, and then it's time to get to the future. What are you going to do about it? And asking them to take really strong action that actually fixes the problem of people feeling frustrated, annoyed, angry, or anything that's negative, asking them to fix that is key, which leads us to strategy number 4, which is that we need to take what we call apologies of action. Now, this is a rather gross kind of picture here with this sweat on the skin, but it reminds me, I think this is an expression that came to me while I spent my many years working with wonderful people in Darwin in the Northern Territory, is that it reminds me that apologies should not be the fake apology where we just, as a reflex action, say sorry, because sorry, a fake sorry is not an expression of empathy. In fact, just say sorry is an expression of sympathy, because most of our young people say sorry because I would like to feel a little bit better about what happened. I'm not particularly interested in fixing the problem. What I am interested in doing is getting myself either out of trouble or feeling a little bit better about the problem that I have caused. That's, like I said, a sympathetic thing to do and isn't empathic at all. So apologies of action is what I'm on about. I love sweaty apologies. Go to a little bit of effort. Get off your backside, pick up a pen, do something with your arms, do something that might raise a sweat, do something that requires some sort of exertion that actually fixes the problem. So even if it's in as simple as, you know, doing something as uncomfortable as giving someone a hug and everything like that, you know, I know that it's one of my favourite things that when I see my own children who are at the absolute polar opposites of hug. You know, I have a 15-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son. The 15-year-old daughter loves a hug, and if her brother does something to her that she doesn't like and we ask them to repair it, she'll often say, I just need a hug and to move on. Now, the 12-year-old boy completely despises giving hugs. Bad luck. That's what she needs for you to move on. And a fake sorry looking in the other direction, slightly sneered, is not going to fix it up. So the great part about apologies of action is that they are high expectation and high effort things to do. So whether it's a hug, whether it's writing someone a letter, whether it's drawing them a card or a picture, whether it's doing a favour for that person, I've had young people who've really learned to try and fix. I had a young man who I worked with for a long time whose behaviour was a real challenge, largely due to his Tourette syndrome. But what he learned across the trip was that there were things he could do if he did the wrong thing. If the low impulse control crept in and he swore at a teacher, he was able to take a few minutes off, then go and see that teacher and say, hey, can I come into your classroom and just help you clean up a little bit, because I really want to say sorry that way. And that's a terrific way for young people to take responsibility for the way they work, is to do something like that. Make a promise. And I've even had a school recently that I thought was very clever, and clever to the point of, you know, almost cunning, was that this school was able to, they used video. So what they did was they were able to, you know, record a little video message of somebody apologising for the way that they made somebody else feel and making agreement about how they were going to treat that person from now on. They gave that video to the other person. They were able to show it to parents to show what the agreement was and that they were done and dusted, they'd agreed to it. But the really clever part about it is they were able to bring that video back later on and check in about whether they were actually meeting that expectation, or to actually point out to them that they made agreements about what would happen if they didn't meet that expectation. Because, you know, we need to close the loop on some of those students too as we go. So 4 key strategies there, guys. I want you to remember them. Number 1 is to bolster the emotional vocabulary. Number 2 is to get Socratic, ask questions, get comfortable with silence, probe, probe, probe. Strategy 3 is to go past, present, future. Make sure we get to future and don't get anchored, don't get stuck in the past where it is all about self-preservation. And then strategy 4 is to encourage apologies of action. Take them out of sympathy, where it's about making me feel better, and into empathy, where it's about making somebody else feel better for the impact that I've had on their relation, had on the way that they're functioning and their well-being. I'm going to stop there and just say that's the end of the content bit here. I hope that today has been productive for you. I want to give you just a moment here to have a little think about whether you do have any questions, and I want to give you the chance to write them in there, or indeed to put your hand up if you would like to be unmuted. I want to thank Geraldine Painter for her contribution in the question box today. I really appreciate that. And while I'm actually giving you the chance to do that, I just want to point out one thing to you, and that is that we have and it's not a new offer. We piloted over the last 12 to 14 months or so our Teacher FastTrack program that has modules a little like the one that you've done today. 10 modules designed to assist teachers in the classroom. Now, getting it going was a bit of a challenge, and it can be an expensive challenge to actually put together a full online unit that's full of videos, it's full of additional resources. We mentor and coach the people in this program as well. We provide a local mentor and resource that person too. But now that it's up and running, we know that we're in a position to be able, and we've got people in the program, which is just great, because the main reason why I mention this is that we've got people who are giving us some incredible testimonial at the moment for their involvement. The main, I guess, bit of feedback we're getting is that teachers are really enjoying being able to do practical professional learning at a time and at a pace that suits them. So once a month we send you a new module, and we don't even send them in January and December for very obvious reasons, but we roll in a whole heap of other supports, and we can now get teachers in your school access to the Teacher Fast Track program, a 12-month commitment for just $475. Now, if you can find a workshop out there that gives you 12-month worth of bang for $475, I say well done. But I don't even think I've delivered a workshop that provides $475 worth of bang over a 12-month period. So if you think you can do that, then I say congratulations to you. But one of the things we want to offer you today is that if that price, which is half of the regular price, if that price of $475 appeals to you, or you think it might appeal to people in your school, I just want you to put TFT in the question box, and what we're going to do is just send you an electronic version of our prospectus. We want to give you the chance to get involved in that, and we're really excited about it. It came out of a dare, which was that people told us they didn't think we could do great professional learning for teachers unless it was face-to-face, and we're just so wrapped that we've got people who are involved in this program and who are getting enormous benefit from it, and we want to make sure that they continue to get benefit, and the people in your school do as well. I'm just noticing here that, Gail, you've got a question about no speaker ability. Okay, I was thinking about the why and how graph and was wondering if intuitive empathy could be divided into initially the person's ability to read body language, and then another section where you have the ability to resource from your ability to think about how you would feel in that situation, a more abstract level. I think you're probably onto something there, Gail. I think that the first step is the ability to be able to recognise generic and routine patterns and trends in the way that facial expressions or the way that body language manifests, and then I think it's about the ability to, at the top of that intuitive or that brown section of that graph, I think would be the ability that when you're highly empathic, you can understand that not only would a person feel that way if I did this, but this is how I believe this person would feel that way. I think that's a very intuitive level of empathy. And again, I believe that the best way to get our kids to transform into that intuitive level, or to step up into that intuitive level, is to at least ensure from an explicit teaching point of view that we've done the stuff that allows them to build that cognitive level of empathy. So I agree. I think there are phases within that intuitive level that kids would get to. For the purpose of today, I just wanted to make sure that we were aware that there's two different ways that we can learn about empathy. So thank you very much for your question, Gail. All right. Seeing that I cannot see any other questions there at the moment. No, I've got one from Tony. Adam, how would you suggest handling parents who do not promote empathy with their children, but do promote the stand up for yourself approach? Yeah, I think that's a really important one, Tony. And you're going to, Tony, it's almost like I planted you, because I'm going to actually just quickly go 2 slides forward. This is obviously a reminder to go and have a look at the webpage, but you already know where that is. This is how you get in touch with us if you want to know more. But this slide is our very next webinar that we're going to run on Wednesday the 10th of August. So we want to make sure that when you get your follow-up email from today, look for the link for that, because we'll spend, and I'm not trying to avoid your question at all, Tony, but we're going to spend a whole hour looking at the new and effective ways to communicate with parents and to build buy-in with parents through our making contact. How do we suggest handling that situation with parents who say that, you know, stand up for yourself is the way that I go? Number one is to understand for the students are well capable from a very, very early age. We learn this at about 2 or 3 to differentiate our context. So number one, it isn't okay for students to behave one way in one place, and then differently in another. Sorry, it is okay. That happens all the time. So students can learn by being told directly and then by following through in a very supportive way, of course, that that behaviour might be okay at home, but it isn't okay here, and these are the reasons for that. The other thing I would suggest really strongly is that we make sure that we promote with parents not just dealing with this when they're under duress. Okay, we don't want to just deal with parents when they're, for instance, using the limbic system or the feelings part of their brain, and then try to explain to them why stand up for yourself and belt someone if they look at you sideways is not a good strategy. What we want to do is get to our parents when they're in their thinking best. So that means if we do have parents who we have persistent problems with, it's been very strategic about finding a time that I can talk to them when there hasn't been an issue. I don't have a problem. What I want to do is talk to you about the way that we deal with students who hurt each other at school, because I know that your lads have a couple of problems here, and in the future I reckon it's just so important that we respect you enough to let you know in advance what we're doing. So it's my step one is to try to manufacture a conversation when the parent is not upset and when there isn't a problem. Another question from Gail. Thank you so much, Gail. Does this link into understanding such as Kohlberg's level of moral judgment or Piaget's forms of logic or Selman's perspective taking? I certainly am not going to, at this moment, Gail, leap into my understanding of each, while I do have a very basic understanding of them. I won't leap into making those direct links because I think that I would do them incorrectly, but I'd encourage you, Gail, to go and have a look if there are approaches that your school's using. More than happy for you to go and have a look for the correlations there and to look for the starting points that fit neatly between the theories that you're using there. All right, just checking one last time. I thank you all so much for your questions today. It's really fabulous when the webinar becomes something that serves you rather than me just doing my little PowerPoint thing on my screen. I'm going to let you go there, guys. Thank you so much for your participation. Keep an eye out for that link on Making Contact. We think that this is a webinar that you're really going to enjoy and get a great deal from. Enjoy the rest of your holidays, and I wish you every success for term 3, for all of semester 2 and beyond. I think that it's a topic that, like I said today, that I thank Wei for her contribution there. It's a very interesting talk. I learned something today. It's not something that, while I hope those strategies are things you're able to deploy straight away, it's something that we need to get our heads into and really spend a bit of time thinking about, rather than perhaps just lamenting the absence of empathy in our schools. So it's a difficult one, and I thank you so much for giving up a part of your time on your holidays to be able to stick your head in that thinking space. Well done. Enjoy the rest of your holidays. I'm going to see you all in August for Making Contact. I'll see you then. Bye for now.